Two teenagers were kicked out of a luxury car dealership just because of their appearance. The next day, they returned, but not alone. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're from. The morning sunlight spilled gently through the wide windows of the Carter residence, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors and white marble columns. It was a quiet house, not quiet from absence, but from design. Everything in the estate felt measured, intentional. Each piece of art on the walls had meaning, each sound muffled by layers of architecture and wealth. To most of the world, it was the home of an elusive tech magnate, a billionaire whose influence stretched across continents, markets, and governments. But to Jaden and Malik, it was simply where they lived, where they grew up. Not a monument, just home. Jaden, 16, stood at the edge of his desk, holding a small plastic model of a Bugatti. His fingers traced the lines of the sleek replica, eyes narrowing with appreciation for every curve. Across the room, Malik, his 14-year-old brother, was hunched over a sketch pad, furiously shading the tail end of a futuristic-looking concept car he'd been working on for days. The room smelled faintly of graphite and new books, their shared space a mix of precision and imagination, like the brothers themselves. Jaden was the more analytical one, drawn to aerodynamics, mechanical design, the hidden genius beneath the surface of machines. Malik had an artist's heart, fascinated by shapes, by color, by how a car could feel fast just by the way it looked. Between them, they could build a car from nothing, or at least dream one into being. "You know, they got the Venom GT at Lux Auto now," Jaden said without looking up. His voice was casual, but Malik immediately picked up the change in tone, the way the words hovered in the air a moment longer than necessary. "For real?" Malik's pencil froze. "The real thing?" "Yeah. Midnight black, carbon weave on the spoiler. I saw a clip on Insta last night. It's sitting on the main floor." There was a pause. The sketch pad was abandoned. The model car returned to its stand. "Let's go see it," Malik said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jaden turned to him slowly, then nodded. "Let's." They didn't tell anyone. Not out of rebellion, but because they didn't need to. Their father trusted them to move through the world with purpose, even if they hadn't earned that freedom the same way he had. It was an unspoken understanding, the way respect moved in their house, quiet but firm. They dressed simply. Clean white t-shirts, cargo shorts, sneakers that had seen the inside of more bike pedals than store shelves. Jaden pulled a hoodie over his shoulders. Malik grabbed his sketch pad out of habit. Neither wore watches, chains, or anything that would hint at their last name. They didn't want to be Carter today. They just wanted to be two kids who loved cars. They left through the side gate, cutting through the manicured hedges and down the winding street that led away from the estate and toward the city. A car from the family fleet followed at a distance, as it always did, though they didn't acknowledge it. It was protocol. But the ride to the city was theirs alone, a series of buses, sidewalks, and short walks in between. They blended into the background like any other pair of teenagers, invisible in a world that so often only saw what it wanted. The city buzzed with its usual urgency. Office workers clutched coffees, street vendors shouted specials, and cyclists weaved through tight corners like fish in a current. Jaden and Malik navigated it all with the ease of boys who had been taught to observe first, act second. They said little, letting the noise around them fill the spaces between their thoughts. As they reached the edge of the upscale district, the air shifted. The buildings grew taller, shinier. Storefronts gleamed with imported glass and minimalist signage. Lux Auto was easy to spot, an architectural statement of wealth, all steel lines and panoramic windows. The cars on display were no less aggressive in their elegance. Lamborghinis poised like jungle cats, Bentleys with hoods longer than city blocks, a McLaren that looked like it had just landed from orbit. Malik whistled under his breath. They really got everything in here. Jaden didn't respond. His eyes were already locked on the interior, his stride quickening as they reached the steps. Inside, the space was hushed, almost reverent. The floor gleamed like black water. Music played softly from hidden speakers, just enough to remind you that this was a place where silence was expensive. Everything smelled of leather, polish, and exclusivity. The boys stood at the entrance for a moment, taking it in. They didn't bolt forward or start pointing. They didn't even touch anything. They simply looked, heads tilting slightly as they took in the subtle lines of a Pagani, the aggressive stance of a Ferrari FSXK, the deep, ocean-dark gleam of a Bugatti Chiron. That was the one. The Venom GT was tucked under a spotlight, its body a sculpture of power. Jaden stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. That's it. That's the one. Malik followed, eyes wide. His fingers itched to sketch, but he didn't dare lift his pencil here. They stood there a long time, saying nothing, lost in the sheer artistry before them, and for a moment it was perfect. No one had spoken to them. No one had looked their way. Yet. They continued to admire the cars, moving slowly and with care, speaking to each other in low voices. Jaden pointed out the carbon fiber monocoque, explained how the rear diffuser worked. Malik listened intently, asking questions about the air intake and the weight balance. Their curiosity was focused, intelligent, respectful. They didn't notice the eyes at first. Not until a man in a navy blue suit emerged from behind a glass-walled office, his step sharp, his expression practiced. His gaze swept the showroom with mild boredom, until it landed on them. There was a slight pause, the kind that only someone paying close attention would notice. Then he adjusted his cufflinks and started walking toward them. Jaden glanced sideways, caught the approach, and instinctively straightened. Malik's shoulders tensed. They were used to being noticed, but not like this. Still, they held their ground, eyes returning to the car in front of them. They weren't trespassing. They weren't causing trouble. But in a place like this, being present was sometimes enough to be considered guilty. Jaden turned slightly to his brother. "We'll just look a bit more, then go," he murmured. Malik nodded, though the excitement in his eyes had dimmed. His sketchpad remained unopened. The man in the suit was nearly on them now, his polished shoes soundless on the marble. He said nothing as he approached, but his presence carried a message loud enough. Jaden pretended not to notice. Malik pretended not to shrink. The moment was fragile, beautiful, but on the edge. They didn't know that in just a few minutes it would shatter. And what had begun as an innocent visit, born of passion and wonder, would become something else entirely. Not because of who they were, but because of what they weren't allowed to be in the eyes of those who had already decided. The dream was still intact, but soon the world would remind them what it cost to carry it while wearing the wrong skin. Jaden sensed it before he saw it. That particular kind of shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. The way tension can hum just beneath the surface, like a current you don't feel until you're caught in it. He didn't turn right away. He wanted to believe that maybe they would be allowed to enjoy this one moment undisturbed, that their interest and respect for the place would be enough. But deep down, he already knew. The man in the suit was close now, mid-40s, white, clean-shaven with a chiseled jaw and cold, appraising eyes. His suit was dark navy, tailored to perfection, and his expression held a kind of restrained disdain that came not from personal offense, but from assumption. It was in the way his gaze moved, not to meet theirs, but to scan their clothes, their shoes, the very way they stood. A silent inventory, a judgment rendered without a word spoken. Malik shifted slightly beside his brother, clutching the strap of his sketchpad tighter. His excitement had almost vanished entirely now, replaced by something smaller and harder, a quiet confusion that teetered dangerously close to shame. He wasn't sure why he felt like apologizing. They hadn't done anything wrong. The man stopped a few feet away, close enough for his cologne to cut through the polish and leather that perfumed the showroom. "Can I help you?" he asked. His tone was flat, not rude, but not friendly either. The kind of voice that comes from someone who is already calculating the fastest way to make you leave. Jaden offered a polite smile, hesitant but genuine. "We were just admiring the Venom GT." The man tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "You do realize that vehicle starts at over $900,000? He said, enunciating each word as if they were particularly difficult to grasp. There was no malice in his voice, just something worse, dismissal, like he wasn't even bothering to hide what he thought. Malik blinked. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. The man gave a small, dry chuckle. "Well, this isn't really a public display. We're a private dealer. Clients are by appointment only." That wasn't true. Jaden had checked. The showroom had open hours, just like any other luxury dealer in the district. But he knew arguing would only make things worse. The truth didn't matter right now, not to this man. "We weren't planning on staying long," Jaden said, "just really wanted to see it up close." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you did." Another man nearby, slightly older in a charcoal gray suit, glanced over and smirked. He didn't bother hiding it. He nudged the younger salesman next to him and whispered something. The younger one chuckled. Across the room, a customer, a tall, bearded white man with a Rolex peeking from under his cuff, turned and said loudly enough to carry, "Let me guess. School project?" Laughter. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind that cuts deeper for being controlled, for sounding like the participants didn't even think they were being cruel. Just clever. Just superior. Malik's face burned. He looked down at his shoes. Jaden felt something inside him sink, slow and heavy. The lightness of that morning, the quiet joy they'd carried with them, drained like water from a cracked cup. The man in the navy suit stepped slightly closer, hands folded in front of him now like a well-trained concierge escorting an unwanted guest to the door. "I think perhaps this environment isn't the right fit. There's a Toyota showroom across town that might be more in line with what you're exploring." Jaden flinched, but only inwardly. He forced himself to nod. "Sorry to bother you," he said. He reached out and gently touched Malik's arm. They turned, not too quickly, and walked back toward the glass doors. No one stopped them. No one called them back. No one offered a second glance. As they pushed the doors open and stepped into the bright light of the late morning sun, the warmth didn't reach them. Jaden squinted, not from the sun, but from the pressure that had been building behind his eyes. They didn't speak. They retrieved their bus passes from their pockets like they were handling something delicate, and waited at the stop in silence. Behind them, inside the glass fortress, laughter still echoed faintly. Faint, but unforgettable. The ride back felt longer than the trip in. Malik sat with his head against the window, watching the city blur past, his reflection a vague shadow in the moving glass. Jaden sat beside him, his hands clasped together, resting on his lap, trying to process the strange weight in his chest. It wasn't just about being turned away. It wasn't even about the laughter. It was about how easily it had happened, how quickly they'd been judged, how invisible their intentions had become under the assumptions layered on their skin. Jaden wasn't angry, not yet. Anger required energy, and right now he felt drained. He felt disappointed. Not in himself, not in Malik, but in the world, for being exactly what his father had always prepared him for. Malik finally spoke, his voice muffled. "Did we look that out of place?" Jaden turned toward him. "No," he said softly. "We looked like ourselves." They returned home just after noon. The estate gates opened without a sound, as if sensing their mood. The car that had been trailing them parked in the rear drive without acknowledgement. No questions asked, no conversations forced. They entered through the side entrance, kicked off their shoes like they always did, and wandered back into the familiar quiet of the house. But this time it felt different. Jaden went straight to his room, Malik to his. Doors clicked shut. Neither brother turned on music or games. They just sat with the weight of the morning, each alone with their thoughts. Downstairs in the sun-filled study near the back of the house, their father's absence was still present. He was expected home later that night. A meeting overseas had run long. He didn't know what had happened. Yet. Jaden lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, recalling the look on that salesman's face. It wasn't hatred. That would have been easier to deal with. It was something colder, indifference wrapped in superiority. The kind of judgment that didn't see you as a person, just as a category. Malik sat at his desk, staring at the blank page of his sketchpad. His pencil rested at an angle, untouched. He hadn't drawn a line since that morning. Every time he thought of the Venom GT now, it wasn't the shape of the car that came to mind. It was the way that man had looked at them, as if they didn't belong. The rest of the day passed slowly. Lunch was eaten in silence. No conversation during the early afternoon. The usual peace of their home felt strained, the air heavier somehow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. In the evening, when the sun dipped low behind the hills and long shadows stretched across the stone floors, the sound of a car engine cut through the stillness. Their father had returned. Malik heard the front doors open. Footsteps moved down the hall, deliberate but unhurried. Jaden emerged from his room just as his father reached the stairs. Their eyes met. "Everything all right?" his father asked, voice steady. Jaden hesitated. Then he nodded, not entirely convincingly. Malik appeared behind him, arms folded tight across his chest. Their father studied them both, his gaze lingering. He said nothing more, simply gestured toward the sitting room. The boys followed. It was time to tell him. And the story they were about to share would not be filled with outrage or confrontation or anger. It would be quiet, halting, filled with pauses and unsure glances, but it would be heard, and that, more than anything, would be the beginning of something they couldn't yet imagine, because their father wasn't the kind of man who forgot. He was the kind of man who remembered, with precision. The room was dim, touched only by the soft amber hue of the setting sun filtering through the tall windows. Shadows stretched across the floor, climbing the legs of leather chairs and flickering gently against the glass of polished picture frames. The house, usually so still and regal in its silence, now seemed to listen, as if it too anticipated what was about to unfold. Jaden sat rigid in the armchair nearest the fireplace, his hands loosely clasped between his knees. His sneakers were still dusty from the street, and a thin smudge of grime ran across the back of his shirt from where he had leaned against a bus seat. He hadn't changed since returning home. Malik sat across from him, quieter than usual, legs pulled up slightly, arms wrapped around them in the way children sit when they're trying to make themselves smaller. The sketch pad lay abandoned between them on the low table, unopened. Their father moved with the unhurried calm of someone who had long ago mastered the art of presence. He didn't demand attention. He simply created space for it. He stood by the window for a moment, his back to them, hands behind him, gazing out at the manicured gardens beyond the glass. Then he turned and walked slowly to the seat across from his son's, lowering himself with a measured breath. His suit jacket remained buttoned. His posture was flawless. But his eyes, sharp, dark, unblinking, softened when they landed on his boys. Jaden was the first to speak, though it took him a moment to begin. He wasn't used to his own voice feeling uncertain. He'd been raised to speak clearly, to articulate his thoughts with confidence. But now, in the quiet intimacy of the study, those teachings trembled under the weight of what he had to say. "We went downtown," he said finally. His father nodded once, not in surprise, not in approval, just a simple acknowledgement that he was listening. "To the Lux Auto Showroom," Jaden continued. "We wanted to see the Venom GT. They just got one in." Malik's head turned slightly, watching his brother, then slowly turned back toward their father. "We took the bus," Jaden added unnecessarily. "We didn't want to, show up like—" He stopped. "Like Carter's," Malik finished quietly. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was expectant. Jaden took a breath. "We walked in, didn't touch anything. We were just looking. Talking about the car, that's all." He paused again, then added with effort, "Then a salesman came over." There was no need to describe the man. The expression on their father's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Jaden tried to explain the interaction, but the words came haltingly now. Not because he didn't remember, he remembered every second, but because reliving it here, in this house, felt strange. Like importing a foreign infection into a place that had always felt safe. "He made it clear we didn't belong there," Jaden said, trying to keep his tone even. "Told us the car started at $900,000. Asked if we were lost. Said there was a Toyota place across town." Malik's fingers tightened around his knees. "Then one of the customers joked about it being a school project," Jaden added. "People laughed, like we were a joke." Their father didn't move. Not a flicker of outrage, not a clenched fist or a flash of anger. Just that same unnerving stillness. He watched his son speak, and when they faltered, he didn't interrupt. He waited. Present. Focused. "There was a woman there," Malik said finally. His voice was soft but clear. "She didn't say anything while it was happening, but she looked like she wanted to, like she felt bad. We didn't get her name." Jaden nodded. "She looked young, not like the others." Their father shifted only slightly, enough to lean forward, resting his forearms on his knees. His eyes were on Malik now. "Did she know who you were?" he asked. Malik shook his head. "We didn't say." Their father nodded again, slower this time. "Smart," he murmured. He leaned back, exhaling once, deeply but silently. His gaze drifted toward the unlit fireplace as if seeing something the boys couldn't. Malik broke the silence again, his voice so low it almost disappeared. "Why do people treat you different based on what you wear?" The question hung in the air. Their father didn't answer immediately. He looked over at Malik, then at Jaden, then back to the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. "Because people often confuse appearance with value," he said at last. "And that tells you more about them than it does about you." Jaden swallowed hard, the truth of that sentence hitting deeper than he expected. He thought of the salesman's smirk, the laughter, the feeling of being seen but not recognized. Their father stood slowly and walked to the window again, folding his hands behind his back. The sky was beginning to change outside, streaks of lavender and rose-colored light stretching over the tops of distant trees. He didn't speak for a long time. The boys waited. When he finally turned around, his voice was quieter than before. "Thank you for telling me." It was all he said, but in those 5 words was a storm. Jaden didn't know what he expected. Maybe promises of confrontation, calls to lawyers, demands for accountability. But what he received instead was something far more unsettling. Calm. Their father was not a man of explosions. He was a man of precision. And when he moved, the world usually noticed. Dinner that night was quiet, more than usual. The long dining table, polished to a mirror shine, stretched far across the room, but they sat close together at one end, as they always did. Plates of roasted vegetables, grilled fish, and wild rice were served by silent staff, who seemed to sense the unspoken weight in the room. A soft jazz melody played through the ceiling speakers, filling the space without intruding. Malik picked at his food. Jaden ate slowly, occasionally glancing at his father, who sat with the same calm composure, every movement deliberate. He cut his food neatly, chewed carefully, swallowed fully before speaking. His entire presence radiated patience. At one point, Jaden cleared his throat. "You're not mad?" Their father didn't look up. "At whom?" Jaden hesitated. "The salesman, the people who laughed." Their father placed his fork down and looked directly at him. "I don't waste anger on people who show me who they are," he said. "I pay attention, and then I act when it matters." He returned to his meal. That was the end of it, or so it seemed. Later that night, after the house had gone still, the lights dimmed and the staff retreated to their quarters, the sound of quiet footsteps moved through the marble-floored hallway. Their father entered his study and closed the door behind him. He walked to the desk, unlocked a drawer, and removed a phone that was rarely used. He dialed a number from memory and waited. "Yes," he said into the receiver. "I need both cars delivered here by 8 a.m. tomorrow. No delays." There was a pause. "No, not the usual delivery. I want the drivers to wait outside the dealership until I arrive. I want the timing to be precise." Another pause, then quieter. It's time they remembered not everyone who looks ordinary is. He ended the call and placed the phone down on the desk, leaning back in his chair. In the darkened room, his face was unreadable. Outside, the garden lights flickered on, illuminating rows of lavender and trimmed hedges. The estate exhaled softly. Upstairs, Jaden and Malik slept, unaware of what had just been set in motion. They would wake the next morning, still feeling the sting of what had happened. But by the end of that day, the world would see them very differently. And more importantly, it would remember that dignity doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs the right moment to shine. The morning air carried a softness that only early hours could provide. The city was not yet fully awake, though its arteries, wide, paved and polished, had begun to throb with signs of movement. Delivery vans unloaded behind cafes, uniformed staff wiped condensation from glass doors, and valet stands stood vacant but prepared. In the heart of the upscale district, Lux Auto's lights flickered on in seamless sequences. Polished marble gleamed beneath overhead fixtures, and the first staff members arrived, their shoes clicking lightly on the showroom floor, the scent of espresso wafting from the machine behind the service desk. Another ordinary day was beginning. Inside the dealership, Harrison, now without jacket but still sharply dressed, reviewed the morning's appointments on a tablet. His mind wasn't on work yet. It lingered on the previous day's events, specifically on the story he had retold twice already that morning with smug delight. He had turned the tale of the two boys in cargo shorts and dusty sneakers into a kind of anecdotal warning, a lesson on showroom etiquette, delivered with thinly veiled condescension and no small measure of amusement. The staff who listened had laughed politely, and Harrison relished the performance. At the far end of the showroom, a manager named Preston tapped at his office computer, monitoring inventory turnover and weekend projections. Two junior sales associates leaned on a display case, chatting idly about an influencer who had recently test-driven the new McLaren Artura. Music played softly, something ambient, intentionally forgettable. It was a morning like any other. Until it wasn't. Outside, beyond the dealership's towering glass facade, a low, rich hum began to rise, at first barely audible, like the murmur of thunder on a distant coastline. But then the sound grew, layered and resonant, mechanical yet elegant. Two vehicles approached the dealership's entrance, not with haste, but with measured, inevitable grace. Heads turned. The first car glided into view, obsidian black, sleek as a predator, its paint glinting like volcanic glass beneath the rising sun. The second followed, deep royal blue with rose gold accents that caught the light like molten metal. These were not just cars. They were statements sculpted into motion. The black one was a Rolls-Royce boat tail. The blue one was another, a twin, equally rare, equally impossible to obtain through ordinary channels. Together, they were worth more than most of the building's contents combined. They did not park in the designated luxury client spaces. They stopped directly in front of the main entrance, their silhouettes perfectly framed by the dealership's glass. The engines fell silent, but the tension they left in their wake did not. Inside, the effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. One client, holding a demitasse of espresso, tilted his head and squinted at the cars, his cup frozen halfway to his lips. Another, seated with a sales associate, slowly lowered his sunglasses in disbelief. Staff members rose from their stools, murmuring questions to each other. Preston stepped out of his office, furrowing his brow. Then, the rear door of the blue boat tail opened. The first to emerge was Malik. Same white t-shirt, same cargo shorts, same worn sneakers. Then Jaden, matching his brother not only in attire, but in posture, in stillness. The boys stood side by side on the pavement, unhurried, undeterred. There was no bravado in them, no challenge, just composure. The glass doors had not yet opened, but already the atmosphere inside had shifted. Harrison, mid-story to a colleague, stopped speaking. His mouth hung slightly ajar. His eyes moved from the boys to the cars, then back again, and a thin line of discomfort crept into his expression. The rear door of the black boat tail opened. He stepped out. Their father moved like someone used to space parting before him. No wasted motion, no glance for approval. His charcoal gray suit was immaculately cut, his shoes shining, his cufflinks glinting beneath the cuff. He did not smile. He didn't need to. His presence spoke for itself. The three of them, the boys in their street clothes and the man in his armor of elegance, stood a moment in the morning light. Then they entered. The automatic glass doors whispered open. The interior of Lux Auto fell into a hush deeper than silence. Conversations ceased. Movement slowed. A subtle tension crept over every surface, thickening the air. They walked together, a deliberate pace that echoed against the polished floors. Jaden and Malik looked forward, not left or right. Their faces betrayed no emotion, no smugness, no fear, no defiance. Just a quiet confidence that sat like armor over their shoulders. The same boys who had been laughed at, ushered out, dismissed, had returned, not to prove anything, but simply to exist in truth, unfiltered, unafraid. Their father led them to the front reception desk. The receptionist, a woman named Lauren, who had only recently transferred from another location, stared at the trio with a kind of stunned respect. She recognized the boys first, then the man. Her voice caught in her throat. He spoke with clarity. "I'd like to speak with the staff member who assisted my sons yesterday." Lauren blinked. "Yes, sir. One moment, please." Before she could reach for the phone, Harrison stepped forward. His voice, upbeat, falsely casual, broke the tension. "That was actually me," he said, forcing a smile. The man turned. "No," he said, not loud, not harsh, but final. Harrison stopped as if struck. His hands twitched at his sides. His smile withered. "I believe you were not the one who helped them," the man said, addressing the receptionist again. Then his eyes shifted toward the office at the back of the dealership. "Perhaps your security cameras can clarify that." Preston, standing half a step from his office, straightened. He gave a slow, uncertain nod. "Yes, sir. We archive all customer interactions." "Then I suggest you review the footage," the man said, "before this conversation continues." Preston vanished behind the glass door. The air in the showroom became denser with every second. Staff whispered to one another. A customer took a step back. Another pulled out a phone, not to record, but as a reflex, like someone reaching for a lifeline in an earthquake. Jaden stood still. Malik's fingers remained loose at his sides. They didn't need to do anything. They had already done enough. Preston returned 7 minutes later. His face was pale. His lips pressed into a line. "We reviewed the footage," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The staff member who assisted your sons yesterday was Emily Torres." There was a murmur, almost disbelief. Harrison swallowed. The man raised an eyebrow. "And this man?" he asked, motioning to Harrison. Preston looked at Harrison, then back at the father. "He misrepresented the interaction. His behavior was inappropriate, unprofessional." The man turned fully toward Harrison. "You judged my sons," he said, "not for what they said, not for how they behaved, but for what they wore, and what you assumed that meant." Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came. "You laughed at them," the man continued, "mocked them, treated them like they were invisible, because you assumed they didn't belong." He paused. "The irony is," he let it hang, "you don't belong here." Preston stepped forward again. "Effective immediately," he said. "Harrison is terminated." Gasps rippled through the staff. A door closed somewhere in the back of the building. Harrison didn't argue. He simply nodded once, slowly, then turned and walked toward the employee exit. His path took him past Jaden and Malik. He didn't look at them. They didn't look at him. The man turned back to the receptionist. "Please, bring me Emily Torres." Moments later, the young woman emerged from a hallway behind the showroom. She was in a cream blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes widened when she saw the boys, then shifted quickly to their father. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He nodded once. "More than okay." He looked towards the Venom GT, still parked under its halo of lights. "My sons told me they liked that one." He turned back to her. "I'd like to purchase it." The room fell silent again. She blinked. That's over $3 million." He pulled out a pen. "Then make it 3.1, he said, "and make sure the full commission goes to you." He signed the paperwork at the main counter, the same one where, only a day ago, his sons had stood while others laughed. This was not a transaction. It was a correction, a reckoning. Jaden and Malik didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence now held more weight than any retort ever could. They looked around the room, not with superiority, but with understanding. Deep, unshakable understanding. The world hadn't changed overnight. But here, in this place, something had shifted. And for once, the lesson did not come at their expense. It came at their arrival. The engine of the Venom GT purred low like a great cat resting in the sun. Its power was present, but contained, a promise rather than a threat. The showroom around it was still as glass, the kind of stillness that came only in the wake of revelation. The signatures had been made, the commission assigned, and the truth that had been dragged unwilling and blinking into the light of day now hung heavy in the air like the weight of a verdict no one could refute. Malik shifted slightly, his hand brushing the fender of the car, not in ownership, not in triumph, but in quiet reverence. He didn't need to be reminded of what the car meant to him yesterday. He remembered the moment he had seen it through the glass, the whisper he had spoken to his brother, the awe that had lit his chest like fire. And now, standing here, beside the very same car, the same brother at his side and their father behind them, that moment had not lost its magic. If anything, it had been redefined, not as a fantasy glimpsed from afar, but as a symbol reclaimed. Their father stood a short distance away, speaking with Emily. His tone was even but deliberate. Emily, to her credit, did not shrink under the attention. She nodded when she needed to, asked questions when appropriate, and offered no false humility. Her eyes were clear, her voice steady. She had not expected this moment, and certainly had never imagined it would arrive like this. But now that it had, she carried herself with the quiet grace of someone who knew she had simply done what was right. "Treat people with respect," their father said to her, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "and you'll never need to explain yourself. It speaks for you." Emily looked at Jaden and Malik, then back to him. They were polite, she said, genuinely interested. They asked smart questions. It was obvious they weren't just there to gawk. He nodded once. You saw what others didn't bother to look for. There was no applause, no dramatics, just understanding. The rest of the staff kept their distance. The earlier tension had dissolved into something more difficult to name. Shame, perhaps, or recognition. A junior sales associate who had chuckled yesterday now stood behind a display case, arms crossed tightly, his face a portrait of discomfort. One of the clients, still holding a brochure he'd barely glanced at, quietly laid it on a table and walked out. No purchase made, no goodbye spoken. Jaden and Malik followed their father as he completed the final documentation. Preston handed him a leather case embossed with the car's emblem. Inside, the key fob lay nestled and swayed, shimmering under the lights. Their father opened it and held it out to them, not ceremoniously, but with deliberate simplicity. "Happy early birthday," he said. They took the case together. Malik's fingers touched the metal first, then Jaden's. They exchanged a look, one of shared memory, of gratitude, of understanding that this was not about the car. The paperwork was complete. The deal done. Their father turned to Preston and offered a final instruction. "Ensure that Miss Torres receives her promotion paperwork today. I believe her record is long overdue for recognition." Preston, still recovering from the public unraveling of his showroom's integrity, could only nod. "Yes, sir." Their father extended a hand to Emily. She took it firmly, without hesitation. "You've earned more than a commission," he said. "You've earned trust. That matters more." She smiled. It was the kind of smile that wasn't built for photographs, but for people who knew what it meant to feel unseen and suddenly recognized. She looked again at the boys. Malik offered a quick, shy wave. Jaden gave a subtle nod. They said nothing, but their silence carried everything that needed to be said. The doors opened for them once more as they stepped into the light. The sky outside had grown brighter, the sun high now, spilling golden warmth across the pavement. The twin boat tails waited patiently at the curb, their paint catching the light like ocean waves frozen in time. Drivers opened the doors. The boys stepped into the rear seat of the blue one, Malik clutching the key case in his lap. Their father entered the black one with the same precision he brought to every room he entered. As the cars pulled away, the city did not stop to watch, but the dealership did. Staff stood behind the glass, unmoving. The smirks and dismissive glances that had painted the morning before were gone, scrubbed clean by the quiet force of consequence. Even the janitor, who had watched everything from behind a supply cart, shook his head slowly, more in awe than in disbelief. Inside the showroom, Harrison's former desk now sat empty. His chair still slightly turned as he had left it. His nameplate had already been removed. There was something haunting in its vacancy, not because of the man who was gone, but because of what had been left behind. A reminder, stark and inescapable, that arrogance never ages well under scrutiny. Preston returned to his office and closed the door without a word. The junior associate who had once laughed now sat in front of his monitor, eyes blank, fingers hovering over the keyboard without moving. Emily remained near the Venom GT, touching the vehicle's side almost with reverence. Not because it was now her sale, but because it had come to mean something entirely different. The car had become a moment, an axis around which perception had shifted. The rest of the day moved in cautious rhythm. Customers entered more quietly. Staff spoke more deliberately. A couple asked to be shown a model by Emily directly. Another wanted to know if she was available later in the week. It was not a storm of change, but the start of one. The kind that doesn't tear things down, but slowly, methodically reorders the foundation. That night, the empty desk where Harrison had once sat was cleared. Not just of his personal belongings, but of his legacy. It had become a monument, not to power, but to a mistake. One that had been made out of comfort, out of certainty, and above all, out of assumption. Jaden and Malik returned home as silently as they had left. There was no parade, no cheering staff at the gates. They stepped out of the car, walked up the stone path toward the house, and disappeared into the entryway. Their father did not follow immediately. He remained in his study, standing by the window, watching the last rays of light stretch across the lawn. He did not feel triumphant. He felt focused. Correcting the world, he knew, could never be done in a day. But he had taught his sons something that would remain longer than any contract, longer than any headline. Not every battle is fought with fists. Some are won by simply standing still, while others fall over their own assumptions. Inside the house, Malik returned to his room and sat at his desk. He opened his sketch pad, stared at the blank page for a long moment, then began to draw. Not a car this time, but a door. A simple glass door, like the one they had walked through that morning. But in his drawing, the reflection in the glass showed not the boys as they appeared yesterday, but as they saw themselves. Proud, unshaken, seen. Jaden, in the next room, sat on the edge of his bed and opened his laptop. He typed nothing. Instead, he looked at the screensaver, a photo of a younger version of himself sitting in the driver's seat of a go-kart, helmet in hand, eyes wide. That boy had never stopped believing. He still hadn't. The house was quiet. Their father finally left the study and climbed the stairs, his footsteps soft but steady. He didn't check on them. He didn't need to. He had said everything he intended to say through action, and they had received it. Respect doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply stands its ground. And in the end, it's always recognized, even if it takes the world a little too long to look up and see it. The days that followed unfolded not in a blaze of headlines or media frenzy, but in the subtle, unspoken way that real change often moves, quietly, deliberately, from one mind to another. Lux Auto reopened the next morning with its usual pristine polish, the glass wiped until invisible, the floors gleaming under the first rays of morning light. The usual line of espresso orders ran through the system before 8. The showroom scent was again rich with leather and steel, and the familiar notes of ambient music drifted gently through the speaker system like nothing had changed. But those who worked there knew otherwise. The empty desk where Harrison had held court was no longer simply unoccupied. It had been removed altogether. In its place stood a low, decorative table holding 2 bound automotive catalogs and a single glass sculpture of an abstract car silhouette. A gesture, perhaps, toward aesthetic minimalism. But to those who had been there when the boys returned, the absence of that desk spoke louder than any memo or morning briefing. The power vacuum it left behind was palpable, not just in hierarchy but in tone. Conversations became more measured. Laughter grew more careful. There was no mandate issued from management, no bullet-pointed list of behavioral expectations. And yet, behavior shifted. Emily arrived that morning earlier than usual. She didn't know if she was expected to do anything different, or if she was supposed to wait for a formal announcement. Part of her even feared that the previous day had been some surreal exception to a rule that would reassert itself the moment the sun rose again. But when she entered through the side staff entrance, the receptionist looked up with a knowing smile and greeted her by name with an unfamiliar softness in her tone. A senior sales manager nodded to her in the hallway, something he had never done before. And when she reached her usual desk, now freshly cleaned, she found a sealed envelope resting on the glass surface, embossed with the Lux Auto insignia. She opened it slowly, careful not to damage the paper. Inside was a letter signed by the regional director himself. It was formal, direct, and written with professional restraint. But there, in clear type, was confirmation. Effective immediately, she was to assume the role of senior sales consultant. She would receive a new office, a revised commission structure, and a team of junior staff under her supervision. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note in neat, slanted script read, "You saw what others didn't. That matters here. Congratulations." Emily folded the letter, placed it gently back in the envelope, and exhaled for the first time since stepping through the doors. By mid-morning, she was already seated in her new office. It wasn't lavish, no dramatic art or imported fixtures, but it had a window, a door, and a nameplate bearing her full title. Her first task was not sales-related at all. It was reviewing a list of recent customer complaints and reassigning team responsibilities. The power was real, but it didn't intoxicate her. It centered her. The events of the previous day had not inflated her ego. They had reminded her of who she was before doubt had crept in. Outside her door, the showroom moved differently. Staff members no longer leaned against desks with idle detachment. They stood straighter, spoke softer. Not out of fear, but from an acute awareness that someone was now watching. Not cameras, not supervisors, but each other. Culture, after all, was not enforced from the top. It was built from the ground. The junior associates who had laughed alongside Harrison no longer lingered by the espresso machine. One of them, Jason, asked to shadow Emily that afternoon, not for training hours, but because, as he admitted quietly, "I think I need to watch how it's supposed to be done." Clients, too, seemed to notice the change, though most couldn't name it. They commented that the staff felt more present, that the service seemed more human. Some asked for Emily by name, even those who had never met her, and word began to spread quietly among local business circles that Lux Auto was doing things differently now. The ripple effect reached beyond the building. The dealership's regional director sent a quiet note to other branches, suggesting more rigorous ethics training. One store in Chicago launched an initiative to recruit underrepresented talent for internships. None of this was broadcast. There were no viral videos or press releases, but in the undercurrent of the industry, a lesson had been absorbed. Meanwhile, at the Carter estate, the days passed with their usual quiet rhythm, but a new awareness had settled into its walls. Malik and Jaden resumed their routines, but something in the way they carried themselves had changed. They moved with the calm of those who had stepped into a fire and walked out unburned, not because they were untouched, but because they had learned to endure. Malik returned to his sketches with renewed purpose. His drawings were sharper now, more confident. He filled 2 full pages with concept redesigns of the Venom GT, not because he thought it needed improvement, but because he now saw it through a different lens. He wasn't just recreating beauty. He was studying it, dissecting what gave a shape its power, its presence. The car, to him, had become more than a machine. It was a symbol of perspective, what people see and what they don't. Jaden, on the other hand, dove deeper into research. He printed out articles on showroom design, on customer experience in luxury markets, and even read case studies about unconscious bias in sales. At dinner, he brought one to the table and read a passage aloud about how the highest-performing sales teams weren't necessarily the flashiest or most aggressive. They were the most observant. Their father listened, nodding occasionally, saying little, as always. But the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. He didn't need to retell the story of what he had done. His sons understood the lesson. Dignity doesn't retaliate. It redirects. It makes itself undeniable. The mansion remained unchanged, but the world inside it had deepened. Conversations grew more nuanced. Silence, when it came, felt less like distance and more like space, a room they all respected. Late one afternoon, Jaden stood at the edge of the long driveway, staring at the blue boat tail parked under the covered garage. Its presence still stunned him, not because of its rarity or price tag, but because of what it meant now. It was no longer a fantasy. It was a reminder that dreams, when pursued with discipline and belief, could exist alongside reality. Malik joined him after a moment, his sketchpad tucked under his arm. "Think we'll drive it today?" he asked. Jaden shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe we don't need to." Malik smiled, not because he agreed, but because he understood. Some victories don't need parades. At Lux Auto, Emily stood by the showroom entrance as a new customer stepped in. A man in his 30s, dark-skinned, wearing jeans and a weathered backpack. He walked slowly, his eyes wide, absorbing the cars with the same wonder Malik and Jaden once had. A few staff members glanced toward him, unsure. Emily approached without hesitation. "Welcome," she said warmly. "Is there a model you'd like to see first?" The man looked startled by her kindness, as though bracing for a different tone. Then he relaxed. "I've never been in a place like this," he admitted. "Well," she replied, "there's a first time for everything. Let's make it a good one." She didn't ask about his budget. She didn't scan his shoes. She listened as he spoke, answered his questions with care, and handed him a brochure with notes she'd written herself. He left an hour later without buying anything but smiling, and that mattered just as much. After he exited, Jason approached her. "Thanks for showing me that," he said. Emily smiled again. "Every customer is someone's dream. Don't ever forget that." Upstairs, Preston stood at the railing overlooking the floor. He watched Emily move through the space, not commanding it, but anchoring it. He said nothing, just nodded once and returned to his office. The change had settled, not as a wave, but as a new tide. One that would rise quietly, carrying everyone in the building to a place they had forgotten was possible. Not just profitable, but just. Morning arrived slowly over the Carter estate, as if the sun itself hesitated to disturb the stillness that had settled there over the past few days. Golden light spilled across the polished marble floors of the grand foyer, filtered through tall windows framed with floor-length drapes. In the soft hush of early daylight, the house breathed with the rhythm of quiet purpose. There was no commotion, no hurried footsteps or clinking of silverware, just the distant rustle of wind through manicured trees and the subtle ticking of a clock somewhere deep within the west hallway. Jaden stood at the edge of the upstairs landing, leaning against the banister, looking down into the open space of the living room below. From his vantage point, he could see the modern chandelier suspended like a glass constellation and the velvet blue throw folded precisely across the back of the long sofa. His gaze lingered for a moment, not on the decor or the scale of the home, but on the quietness itself, the kind that didn't just come from wealth, but from order, balance, discipline, things their father had cultivated not to impress the world, but to center his family. He turned away and headed toward Malik's room. The door was open. His brother was already dressed, sitting at his desk, head bowed over his sketchpad. Lines formed in steady rhythm under his hand, curves and angles that only he could see until they were born in graphite. The energy in the drawing was different now, sharper, more grounded. There was still creativity, still imagination, but now it rested atop a deeper understanding of the world. "Morning," Jaden said softly. Malik looked up, nodding with a small smile. "Hey." They didn't talk much in the mornings. They never had to. Some connections didn't need the constant tendon. They simply were. Jaden walked in and leaned against the wall beside the window. Outside, the driveway shimmered with dew, and the blue boat tail sat where it had been the evening before, catching the light like a sleeping giant. He thought of the day they'd ridden in it for the first time, not as passengers, not as witnesses, but as the reason it had been brought there. not because they had demanded it, but because they had deserved it, and someone powerful had seen fit to remind the world of that. "I've been thinking," Jaden said after a pause, "about what happened." Malik kept drawing, but his pencil slowed. Jaden continued, "How it wasn't just about us, how it never really is." Malik looked up again, his eyes darker than usual in the morning light. "You mean because it happens to a lot of people?" "Yeah," Jaden said. "Kids like us, people who don't get seen, or if they do, it's not in the way they should be." Malik nodded and set his pencil down. "You think we'll do something about it?" he asked. Jaden didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward and picked up the sketch pad, flipping through the pages slowly. Dozens of designs filled them. Some technical, some wild, some futuristic, some deeply familiar. But all of them were reflections of Malik's mind, unfiltered. "We already are," Jaden said. Later that day, in the study, their father sat at the long walnut desk that faced a wall of glass opening into the private garden. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his glasses rested on the bridge of his nose as he reviewed a stack of documents. He had been in this position countless times before, signing contracts, reading proposals, shaping the direction of companies and markets. But the papers before him now were different. At the top of the file sat the charter for a new foundation. It didn't bear his name. Instead, it bore the initials of his sons, MJ Initiative. The purpose was clear: to provide access, opportunity, and representation for underprivileged youth in fields where they were often ignored. Automotive engineering, design, business, and more. Full scholarships, paid internships, travel stipends, no strings attached. Just an invitation to step into places where doors were rarely opened, especially for those who didn't arrive dressed like they belonged. The funding was secured. The board was forming. The plan was already in motion. He signed the final page, set the pen down, and looked out at the sunlight dancing on the hedges. A slight breeze moved through the garden, shaking the leaves just enough to remind him that even nature bowed in quiet rhythm to time and intention. Upstairs, the boys packed their things for an early evening drive. Not in the boat tail, but in a more modest coupe, sleek and quiet, the kind of car that didn't turn heads but handled with grace. They liked it for short trips. Jaden held the keys in his hand, flipping them between his fingers as they moved toward the garage. "Where to?" Malik asked, pulling on his jacket. "Neighborhood school," Jaden replied. "Principal invited us to speak. Some kind of weekend career panel." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Us?" Jaden grinned. "Guess we're the example now." They laughed, the sound echoing briefly in the hallway before fading into the steady beat of their footsteps. Outside, the car waited patiently. They got in and drove off, the tires rolling over the cobblestones with smooth precision. The school wasn't far. It sat tucked between two rows of modest homes, its red brick exterior weathered but proud. In the auditorium, a small crowd had gathered. Students, teachers, a few local parents. The boys were introduced without fanfare, just names and ages, no mention of legacy or wealth. Jaden spoke first. He talked about curiosity, about never letting silence from others convince you to stay quiet yourself. Malik followed, showing sketches on a screen, explaining design not as art, but as language. They didn't mention the dealership. They didn't have to. Their presence told the story. Afterward, a boy not much younger than Malik approached, clutching a notebook with car logos doodled in the margins. He looked up at them with wide eyes and asked, "Do you think I could ever work somewhere like that?" Jaden looked at Malik. Then he knelt slightly to meet the boy's eye level. "You won't just work there," he said. "One day you'll run the place." The boy smiled, uncertain but hopeful. As they left the building, Malik turned to his brother. "You really believe that?" "I have to," Jaden said, "because someone believed it about us." Back at Lux Auto, evening lights had begun to dim. The showroom now moved with a different kind of rhythm, less curated, more considerate. Emily finished her last customer meeting and returned to her office. On her desk sat a handwritten card. She opened it and smiled. Inside were 5 words, written in elegant script. "Thank you for seeing them." No signature, no title. But she knew who it was from. She closed the card, placed it in her drawer, and turned off the light. In time, the story would fade from public memory. The headlines would shift to other spectacles. The internet would move on. But for those who had been present, those who had spoken too soon, or stayed silent too long, or dared to look again, nothing had gone unnoticed. At the Carter house, the night came slow and deliberate. Dinner was quiet, as always, but not cold. Jaden and Malik sat close to their father, who listened more than he spoke. There was no mention of what had been done, no praise or proclamation. Instead, as they finished their meal, he said only one thing. "People won't always understand the value of stillness, but it's often the quiet that carries the greatest weight." The boys nodded. Afterward, Malik walked the hall toward his room and paused outside Jaden's door. "You think he'll keep doing it?" he asked. Jaden leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Doing what?" "Reminding people." Jaden smiled. "He doesn't need to. Now they remember." In the days that followed, more young men and women would enter showrooms, offices, and boardrooms where once they might have been ignored. Some would still be dismissed, some would be tested, but a little less often than before, because the world, even if just slightly, had shifted, and sometimes that's all it takes. A moment, a voice, a return, and a legacy that whispers, even when the world is loud. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Check out the other videos for more powerful stories like this one. And if this one spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.